Just energy transition. Imperative for an equitable and sustainable future. Course outline. Introduction to just energy transition. The energy transition landscape. Principles of justice in energy transition. Workers and communities in transition. Policy and governance frameworks. Financing the just transition. Indigenous peoples and local leadership. Youth, future generations and intergenerational justice. Cultural, spiritual and ethical dimensions of transition. Global cooperation and governance for a just transition. Part 1. Introduction to just energy transition. What is a just energy transition? A just energy transition refers to the shift from fossil fuel-based energy systems to renewable and sustainable energy sources in a manner that is fair, inclusive and equitable to all stakeholders, especially workers, communities and vulnerable populations affected by the change. It recognizes that while transitioning to clean energy is necessary to combat climate change, the process must also address the socioeconomic inequalities and environmental injustices historically embedded in our energy systems. Unlike a conventional energy transition, which focuses primarily on the technical and economic aspects of replacing fossil fuels, a just transition places equal emphasis on who is affected, how they are affected, and how they are supported during and after the shift. Historical roots of the concept. The concept of just transition originated within the labor and environmental justice movements, particularly in the United States during the 1970s and 1980s. Labor unions like the Oil, Chemical and Atomic Workers Union, OCAW, recognized that environmental protections could lead to job losses in polluting industries, and began advocating for policies that would support displaced workers. This advocacy laid the foundation for a broader understanding that climate and environmental actions should not come at the expense of social and economic justice. Over time, the idea evolved to encompass a wider range of justice concerns, including fair labor standards and retraining opportunities, community participation in decision-making, environmental cleanup and health protections, access to clean and affordable energy. Why now? The urgency of just transition. Today, as countries commit to climate goals and net zero targets, the scale and speed of energy transition is accelerating. Coal plants are closing, renewable energy installations are multiplying, and new technologies are disrupting traditional energy economies. While this transformation is crucial to limiting global warming, it risks leaving behind millions of workers and communities unless justice is deliberately built into the process. A just transition is no longer a theoretical ideal, it is a practical necessity. Without it, energy transitions risk exacerbating poverty, unemployment, social unrest, and political opposition to climate action. With it, however, they can drive inclusive economic development, improve public health, and strengthen community resilience. Core elements of a just transition. A truly just transition includes several key components. Inclusivity. All voices, especially those most affected, must be part of decision-making processes. Equity. The costs and benefits of the transition should be fairly distributed across regions, income levels, and generations. Support mechanisms. Workers and communities impacted by the shift should receive training, social protection, and investment. Environmental justice. Efforts should prioritize the cleanup of pollution and ensure access to clean air, water, and energy for all. Transparency and accountability. Institutions must be held responsible for delivering on just transition commitments. A global and local agenda. The principles of just transition are globally relevant, but locally specific. In coal-dependent regions of South Africa or India, the focus may be on alternative employment and infrastructure development. In wealthier nations like Germany or Canada, It may involve early retirement programs and reskilling. In indigenous and marginalized communities, energy justice may center around ownership, sovereignty, and cultural preservation. This diversity underscores the need for context-specific strategies rooted in meaningful engagement and respect for local knowledge and values. Looking ahead. The just energy transition is not merely about changing the sources of our power, it is about transforming the power structures themselves. It calls for a new energy paradigm built on justice, dignity, and sustainability. As we explore the dimensions of this transition in the coming parts, we will see how it intersects with labor, governance, finance, technology, and society at large. The path forward is complex but full of opportunity. When guided by justice, the energy transition can be a catalyst for a more inclusive, prosperous, and climate-resilient world. Part 2: The Energy Transition Landscape. Understanding energy transitions. Energy transitions are profound shifts in the way societies produce, distribute, and consume energy. Historically, the world has undergone several such transitions, from wood to coal, coal to oil, and now toward renewable sources such as solar, wind, and hydropower. Each transition has reshaped economies, geopolitical relations, and the environment. What sets the current energy transition apart is its urgency and global scope. Driven by the need to avert the worst impacts of climate change, the move from fossil fuels to low-carbon energy must be rapid, far-reaching, and aligned with global climate targets. The role of fossil fuels. For over a century, fossil fuels, coal, oil, and natural gas, have powered economic growth and industrialization. However, their dominance comes at a steep price. Greenhouse gas emissions. Fossil fuel combustion is the primary driver of global climate change. Air and water pollution. Extraction and use contribute to severe health and environmental degradation. Resource depletion. Fossil fuels are finite and often concentrated in geopolitically sensitive regions. Inequality. The benefits of fossil fuel development have often bypassed local communities while exposing them to environmental harm. These challenges have made the case for a clean energy transition, both a climate imperative and a moral necessity. Rise of renewable energy. Renewable energy technologies have emerged as viable and increasingly competitive alternatives. Key sources include solar power. Photovoltaic and solar thermal systems harness sunlight for electricity and heat. Wind power. Onshore and offshore wind turbines convert kinetic energy into electricity. Hydropower. Rivers and dams generate a steady supply of renewable electricity. Bioenergy and geothermal. Organic waste and Earth's internal heat offer additional clean energy options. These sources are abundant, low-carbon, and increasingly cost-effective, with innovations making them more accessible than ever before. Energy access, reliability, and affordability. A successful energy transition must address not only carbon reduction, but also three critical pillars. Access. Over 700 million people worldwide still lack access to electricity, mostly in sub-Saharan Africa and parts of Asia. Reliability. Frequent outages, voltage fluctuations, and grid limitations hamper economic development. Affordability. High energy costs disproportionately burden low-income households and can exacerbate poverty. A just energy transition prioritizes energy as a human right, not just a commodity, ensuring that clean modern energy is available, reliable, and affordable for all. Regional and sectoral differences. The path to clean energy varies greatly, depending on geography, development level, and economic structure. For example, developed economies are phasing out coal and investing in electric vehicles and smart grids. Developing countries are focused on expanding access while leapfrogging to decentralized renewables. Oil exporting nations face significant revenue and employment risks from declining fossil fuel demand. Energy-intensive sectors like steel, cement, and aviation require tailored strategies involving green hydrogen, carbon capture, and efficiency improvements. Understanding these differences is crucial for designing policies that are both effective and fair. Infrastructure and system transformation. Energy transitions go beyond swapping technologies. They demand a wholesale transformation of infrastructure and systems. Grid modernization, upgrading electricity grids to handle variable renewable inputs. Storage solutions, deploying batteries and other technologies to ensure supply during low sun or low wind periods. Electrification, replacing fossil fuels in transport, heating, and industry with clean electricity. Digitalization, using data and smart technologies to optimize energy production and consumption. This transformation opens up opportunities for innovation and employment, but also raises challenges around investment planning and integration. The interlinkage with climate goals. The energy transition is central to achieving global climate targets. The Paris Agreement calls for limiting global temperature rise to well below 2 degrees Celsius. Achieving net zero emissions by mid-century requires a dramatic cut in fossil fuel use and a surge in renewables. Nationally determined contributions, NDCs, must be aligned with energy transition pathways. A just transition ensures that these environmental goals are not achieved at the expense of workers' livelihoods, human rights, or social stability. Conclusion. The energy transition landscape is dynamic, complex, and full of potential. While technological solutions are advancing rapidly, the social dimensions of change must be equally prioritized. A purely technical or economic focus risks deepening existing inequalities and resistance. A just energy transition, in contrast, recognizes that people are at the heart of this change, and that equity, inclusion, and fairness are as critical as innovation. The next part will explore the principles of justice that must guide this global transformation. Part 3: Principles of Justice in Energy Transition. Justice as the foundation of energy transition. Justice is not an optional add-on to the energy transition, it is its foundation. As societies restructure energy systems to address climate change, the question of justice arises at every level. Who decides the path forward? Who benefits? Who bears the cost? How are past harms addressed? The Just Energy Transition Framework brings these justice considerations into focus, ensuring that the transition is not only fast and effective but also fair, inclusive, and transformative. Environmental justice. Environmental justice centers on the idea that all people, regardless of race, income, or location, have the right to a clean and healthy environment. Historically, polluting industries have been cited in low-income neighborhoods and communities of color, exposing them to disproportionate environmental harms. Key principles include equal protection from environmental hazards, fair treatment in regulatory and permitting processes, equitable distribution of environmental benefits, e.g., clean air, water, and green spaces. In the energy context, this means prioritizing clean energy investments in polluted or underserved communities, ensuring these communities have a voice in energy planning, remediating damage caused by fossil fuel operations. Social and economic justice. The transition to clean energy can either reduce or worsen social inequalities, depending on how it is managed. Social and economic justice involves addressing inequalities in energy access, affordability, and ownership, protecting workers whose jobs are displaced by the transition, supporting economic diversification in fossil fuel-dependent regions. For example, coal miners and oil rig workers need retraining, early retirement options, or pathways into new sectors. Rural areas and indigenous communities may require investment in renewable energy infrastructure and capacity building. Energy cooperatives and community solar programs can promote local ownership and wealth building. A just transition ensures that no one is left behind. Intergenerational equity. Climate change and energy decisions made today will shape the world for generations to come. Intergenerational equity recognizes our moral responsibility to ensure that future generations inherit a planet that is livable, healthy, and just. This principle requires bold climate action now to prevent long-term damage. Sustainable resource management. Long-term policy frameworks that safeguard the interests of future citizens. In practice, this means not deferring difficult decisions and avoiding solutions that provide short-term gains at the expense of long-term sustainability. Procedural justice. Procedural justice ensures that decision-making processes are inclusive, transparent, and democratic. Too often, energy policy is shaped behind closed doors by powerful interests, leaving affected communities with little say. Procedural justice demands meaningful participation of all stakeholders, especially marginalized groups. Free, prior, and informed consent in indigenous territories. Open access to information and opportunities to influence decisions. When people have a seat at the table, the transition becomes more just, legitimate, and effective. Distributive justice. Distributive justice focuses on how the benefits and burdens of the energy transition are shared. This includes who gets clean, affordable energy, who pays for new infrastructure, who receives the economic opportunities and jobs. Distributive justice emphasizes fair allocation of resources and investments, compensation for those adversely affected, support mechanisms for low-income households and communities. For instance, subsidies for rooftop solar should be structured to include renters and lower-income families, not just the wealthy. Recognition justice. Often overlooked, recognition justice is about acknowledging and respecting the identities, experiences, and rights of historically marginalized groups. This includes indigenous peoples, racial and ethnic minorities, women and gender diverse individuals, people with disabilities. Recognition justice involves dismantling systemic barriers and affirming diverse knowledge systems, especially in energy planning and innovation. It also means avoiding one-size-fits-all solutions that ignore cultural and local contexts. Justice in global context. Justice in the energy transition also plays out at the international level. The global north has historically contributed the most to climate change, while the global south faces the brunt of its impacts. Global justice calls for climate finance for developing countries, technology transfer and capacity building, debt relief and fair trade policies. The transition must bridge global inequalities, not deepen them. International solidarity, cooperation, and equitable climate agreements are essential to a just global transition. Justice as a process, not just an outcome. Justice is not a static goal, it is a continuous process. Even with the best intentions, policies can fall short if they are not responsive to community feedback and evolving needs. Therefore, just transition strategies must include mechanisms for monitoring and accountability, be adaptable and iterative, center the voices of those most affected at every stage. Only then can justice be truly embedded in the energy transition. Conclusion. Justice gives the energy transition its soul. It transforms the shift from fossil fuels into a broader movement for dignity, rights, and equity. By grounding the transition in environmental, social, intergenerational, and procedural justice, we can ensure that the journey to a low-carbon future is not only effective, but also fair, inclusive, and empowering. In the next part, we will explore how the transition impacts workers and communities, and what it takes to ensure they thrive, not just survive. Part 4: Workers and Communities in Transition. The human face of the energy transition. Behind every coal mine closure or oil rig decommissioning is a worker, a family, and a community. The shift from fossil fuels to clean energy is more than a technical transformation, it is a deeply human one. Just transition means recognizing and addressing the livelihoods, identities, and futures tied to industries that are now in decline. For many workers, particularly in fossil fuel-dependent regions, the energy transition is not an abstract concept. It is a lived experience filled with uncertainty, anxiety, and potential loss. Managing this transformation responsibly is essential for ensuring fairness, maintaining social cohesion, and sustaining public support for climate action. Understanding the impact on workers. The global move toward low-carbon energy is poised to eliminate millions of jobs in fossil fuel industries, including coal mining and power generation, oil and gas exploration and refining, traditional internal combustion vehicle manufacturing. At the same time, it will create new jobs in renewable energy, solar, wind, geothermal, hydro, energy efficiency, building retrofits, smart grids, clean transportation, electric vehicles, public transit, green manufacturing, and services. However, these new opportunities don't automatically replace the old ones. The skills required, locations involved, and employment terms can differ significantly. Regional and economic dependencies. Certain regions are particularly vulnerable due to their heavy reliance on fossil fuel extraction and processing. These mono-industrial communities often depend on a single employer or industry, lack economic diversification, have limited access to education and healthcare, experience social challenges tied to the boom-bust cycle of extractive industries. Without targeted support, such areas risk economic decline, rising inequality, and political backlash. Strategies for supporting workers. A just transition for workers includes comprehensive support systems. Key strategies include 1. Job training and reskilling. Tailored training programs aligned with clean energy sectors. Partnerships with vocational schools, unions, and employers. Access to digital tools and continuing education. 2. Income support and social protection. Unemployment insurance, wage subsidies, and early retirement options. Health insurance continuity. Safety nets for informal and migrant workers. 3. Job placement services. Career counseling and labor market matching. Relocation assistance, where applicable. Prioritization of local hiring in clean energy projects. 4. Union involvement and worker voice. Empowering unions in shaping transition plans. Ensuring fair labor standards and collective bargaining rights. Creating decent, stable, and safe jobs in new industries. Revitalizing communities. Communities built around fossil fuel economies need more than job programs. They need visionary development strategies that include economic diversification, supporting small businesses, agriculture, tourism, and tech hubs. Infrastructure investment, upgrading transport, broadband, and public services. Environmental remediation, cleaning up polluted sites for safe new uses. Cultural preservation, honoring local heritage and community identity. Local governments, NGOs, businesses, and civil society all play a role in designing and implementing these strategies. The role of government and policy. Government intervention is essential to coordinate and fund a just transition. Policies may include national just transition frameworks, dedicated public investment funds, green industrial policies that encourage job creation, tax reform to ensure fossil fuel profits contribute to the transition fund. A whole-of-government approach, integrating labor, energy, environment, education, and economic ministries is critical. Examples from around the world. Germany. The Coal Commission brought together unions, companies, and civil society to negotiate a coal phase-out by 2038, including billions of euros for regional development. Canada. Just Transition Task Force recommendations for coal workers led to income support, retraining, and community revitalization plans. South Africa. The Just Energy Transition Investment Plan (JET-IP) supports economic restructuring in coal-rich Mpumalanga, focusing on skills training, green jobs, and public consultation. These case studies show that when political will and community engagement align, meaningful outcomes are possible. Challenges to watch for. Even well-designed programs face real obstacles. Mistrust between governments and communities. Resistance from fossil fuel interests. Delays in delivering benefits. Skills mismatch between available jobs and worker experience. It's essential to anticipate these barriers and build adaptive, inclusive processes. Centering justice in transition planning. Successful transitions are built on trust, participation, and responsiveness. Key principles for centering justice include listening to communities early and often, designing solutions with, not just for those affected, honoring local knowledge and priorities, ensuring transparency and accountability. Justice cannot be outsourced or imposed, it must be lived and co-created. Conclusion. The energy transition will shape the lives of millions of workers and the futures of entire communities. A just transition acknowledges their sacrifices, meets their needs, and offers real hope, not empty promises. When we protect people as much as the planet, we unlock a transition that is not only sustainable but truly transformative. In the next part, we'll explore the policy and governance frameworks that enable and sustain a just energy transition. Part 5: Policy and Governance Frameworks. Why governance matters. A just energy transition doesn't happen by chance. It must be designed, enabled, and sustained through strong governance and thoughtful policies. Governments play a central role in steering the transition, setting targets, creating legal frameworks, allocating resources, protecting rights, and ensuring inclusive decision-making. Effective governance ensures the transition is fair, transparent, and inclusive, while avoiding fragmentation, elite capture, or unintended harms to vulnerable populations. Guiding principles for just transition governance. Just transition governance should be built on the following foundational principles. Inclusivity. All stakeholders, especially those most affected, must have a voice. Accountability. Institutions must be held responsible for their actions and outcomes. Transparency. Decision-making processes and data should be open and accessible. Equity. Policies must address historical injustices and ensure fair distribution of benefits and burdens. Resilience. Governance systems must be adaptive to changing circumstances and feedback. National policy frameworks. Many countries are adopting national just transition strategies to ensure that their shift to clean energy is fair and sustainable. These frameworks often include 1. Legal mandates and climate laws. Embedding just transition principles into national climate and energy laws, e.g., Spain, South Africa. Recognizing energy access and environmental protection as rights. 2. Long-term planning. Roadmaps for coal phase-out, net zero emissions, and sectoral transformation. Multi-decade investment strategies for workforce and community support. 3. Dedicated institutions. Just transition commissions, task forces, or agencies to oversee implementation. Multi-stakeholder bodies that include labor, business, civil society, and indigenous representatives. 4. Public finance and investment tools. Transition funds supported by carbon pricing, fossil fuel royalties, or public budgets. Green bonds and climate finance targeted toward just transition goals. Local and subnational governance. Local governments are often closest to the people and play a critical role in executing national plans at the ground level. Their responsibilities include implementing local job programs and training centers, managing land use and permitting for renewable energy projects, facilitating community engagement and participatory planning, supporting vulnerable groups through tailored social services. Effective vertical coordination between national and subnational levels is crucial for coherent and inclusive implementation. International and multilateral governance. Just transition is a global concern, and international cooperation is essential. Key mechanisms and actors include United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, UNFCCC. Just transition is referenced in the Paris Agreement and incorporated into nationally determined contributions (NDCs). International Labour Organization (ILO) promotes labor-centered transition through guidelines and partnerships. World Bank, IMF and multilateral development banks (MDBs) provide funding and technical assistance for transition plans. Climate finance mechanisms. The Green Climate Fund (GCF) and Just Energy Transition Partnerships (JETPs) offer financial support for developing countries. Global governance must recognize power imbalances and ensure that developing countries have the tools to pursue both climate goals and development justice. Policy tools to enable a just transition. A wide range of policy instruments can be deployed to operationalize just transition principles. Economic instruments. Carbon taxes and emissions trading schemes, with revenues earmarked for transition efforts. Subsidies and incentives for clean energy and green industries. Public procurement rules that prioritize socially responsible suppliers. Labor market policies. Active labor market programs (ALMPs), including training, apprenticeships and mobility assistance. Wage protection, unemployment benefits and social insurance for displaced workers. Regulatory and legal tools. Environmental standards and phase-out mandates for polluting technologies. Rights-based laws to ensure energy access, indigenous sovereignty and fair labor practices. Community benefit agreements for large energy infrastructure projects. Ensuring participation and social dialogue. Meaningful participation is central to legitimacy and justice. This involves social dialogue among governments, employers, and labor unions. Community engagement in planning, monitoring, and implementation. Participatory budgeting and co-design of local transition strategies. Participation must be continuous, not a one-time event. Processes must be culturally appropriate, accessible, and well-resourced. Monitoring, evaluation, and adaptive learning. Governance systems must be able to track progress and learn from experience. This includes setting measurable indicators of social, economic, and environmental outcomes. Conducting impact assessments and equity audits. Creating public dashboards and open data platforms. Institutionalizing feedback loops for community input and policy adjustment. Without transparency and accountability, good intentions can falter. Case study: Scotland. Scotland has been recognized as a leader in just transition governance. Key features include a Just Transition Commission advising the government. Legal commitment to net zero by 2045 with just transition principles. Regional economic development strategies for oil-affected areas. Strong social dialogue with unions and communities. This approach offers a model of inclusive, forward-looking governance. Conclusion: policy and governance are the backbone of a just energy transition. Without clear frameworks, inclusive institutions, and responsive processes, the goals of justice and sustainability cannot be met. But with the right tools and approaches, governments can guide an energy transition that is not only low carbon, but also deeply democratic, equitable, and resilient. In the next part, we'll explore the financial architecture needed to fund and sustain a just energy transition. Part 6: Financing the Just Transition. The role of finance in a just transition. Finance is the fuel that powers the engine of the energy transition. Without adequate, accessible, and equitable funding, the most well-intentioned transition plans risk stalling. A just energy transition requires massive investment, not only in renewable energy infrastructure, but also in communities, workers, and institutions to ensure fairness, inclusion, and sustainability. Financing a just transition is not just about mobilizing capital. It's about directing it to the right places, using it to reduce inequality, and ensuring long-term benefits for people and the planet. Estimating the financial needs. According to the International Energy Agency (IEA), clean energy investment must reach over $4 trillion annually by 2030 to meet net zero targets. However, only a fraction of this funding currently supports just transition priorities such as worker reskilling and income support, community revitalization in fossil fuel regions, universal energy access and affordability, indigenous and local ownership of clean energy assets, climate resilience for vulnerable populations. Bridging this gap is one of the defining challenges of our time. Sources of just transition finance. A diverse mix of funding sources must be leveraged to support just transition efforts. Public finance. National budgets and fiscal policy. Governments can allocate funds through ministries of labor, energy, environment, and social welfare. Public development banks. Institutions like the World Bank, African Development Bank, and National Green Banks provide concessional loans and technical assistance. Sovereign wealth funds and climate funds can be redirected toward just transition goals. 2. Private investment. Institutional investors, e.g., pension funds, insurance companies, are increasingly integrating environmental, social, and governance (ESG) criteria. Impact investors target projects that deliver social and environmental returns alongside profit. Corporate finance. Companies in the energy, automotive, and manufacturing sectors are investing in decarbonization and workforce transformation. 3. International climate finance. Green Climate Fund (GCF) and Adaptation Fund support developing countries in their low-carbon transition. Just Energy Transition Partnerships (JETPs) mobilize billions from developed countries to support equitable energy transitions in the Global South, e.g., South Africa, Indonesia, Vietnam. Official development assistance (ODA) from wealthier nations should prioritize just transition in climate-vulnerable regions. Climate and transition bonds. Green bonds and sustainability-linked bonds are growing tools to finance just transition-aligned projects. These include renewable energy generation and transmission, energy efficiency upgrades in low-income housing, clean transportation systems in urban and rural areas, social infrastructure like schools, hospitals, and community centers. Governments and companies can issue bonds tied to social performance metrics, such as job creation, inclusion, and emissions reduction. Ensuring equity in finance. Equity in financing means prioritizing marginalized groups in fund allocation, reducing financial barriers for community-owned or small-scale projects, de-risking investments in underserved areas through guarantees and concessional loans, promoting gender-responsive financing, ensuring women benefit equally from financial flows. Climate and energy finance must be redistributive, not extractive. Justice should be a core metric in how finance is evaluated and dispersed. The role of carbon pricing and fossil fuel subsidy reform. Carbon pricing mechanisms, such as carbon taxes or emissions trading systems, can raise significant revenue that should be recycled into just transition programs, including income support and job training for displaced workers, public transit expansion, green innovation funds, rebates or direct transfers to low-income households. Simultaneously, phasing out fossil fuel subsidies, which amounted to over $7 trillion globally in 2022, frees up public resources that can be redirected toward clean, equitable development. Community-led finance models. Community ownership and grassroots finance models ensure that economic power stays local. These models include energy cooperatives that allow members to co-own renewable projects, community development financial institutions, CDFIs, that lend to marginalized communities, participatory grant-making that lets communities allocate transition funds based on their own priorities. These approaches foster democratic control over energy and build wealth from the ground up. Financial regulation and standards. Governments and financial regulators can help steer markets toward just transition goals by mandating climate and social risk disclosure, establishing just transition taxonomies to define eligible projects, setting social safeguards for investments, e.g., no displacement, fair labor, encouraging fiduciary responsibility to include long-term climate and equity impacts. Tools like the EU Sustainable Finance Taxonomy and Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures, TCFD, are steps in this direction. Barriers to financing the just transition. Despite growing awareness, several challenges persist. Lack of tailored financial products for just transition activities. Underfunding in the Global South and marginalized regions. Weak coordination between finance, energy, and labor sectors. Short-termism in private finance, which discourages long-term investments in people and communities. Overcoming these requires political will, institutional reform, and innovation in financial mechanisms. Conclusion. The just energy transition will be built on the investments we make today. Mobilizing and aligning finance with justice requires bold leadership, inclusive governance, and new financial paradigms that put people and planet before profit. When capital flows in the right direction, into clean energy, good jobs, and empowered communities, transition becomes not just possible but transformative. In the next part, we will explore the role of indigenous peoples and local communities in leading and shaping the just energy transition. Part 7. Indigenous Peoples and Local Leadership. Centering indigenous rights and knowledge. Indigenous peoples are on the front lines of climate change, defending land, water, and cultural survival, while also offering profound solutions rooted in stewardship, resilience, and respect for nature. Any just energy transition must center the rights, voices, and leadership of indigenous communities, not only as stakeholders but as partners and innovators. For too long, energy development, whether fossil fuel or renewable, has come at the expense of indigenous lands and sovereignty. A truly just transition recognizes that justice starts with indigenous peoples, honoring free, prior, and informed consent (FPIC), land rights and self-determination. The role of indigenous communities in climate solutions. Indigenous communities manage or have tenure rights over more than a quarter of the Earth's land surface, including many of the world's richest biodiversity zones and carbon sinks. Their contributions to climate and energy justice include traditional ecological knowledge that informs sustainable land use and resource management, community-based conservation and reforestation projects, decentralized renewable energy initiatives in remote areas, legal and moral leadership in climate litigation and advocacy. Recognizing these contributions means moving from token inclusion to shared governance and ownership. Historic harms and ongoing injustices. The legacy of colonialism, land dispossession, and resource extraction has disproportionately impacted indigenous peoples. In energy projects, this has included forced displacement for hydrodams, pipelines and mining, environmental degradation from oil spills, toxic waste and deforestation, lack of benefit sharing in projects operating on ancestral territories, criminalization and violence against indigenous land defenders. A just transition must be a process of repair, acknowledging these injustices, and actively reversing patterns of exclusion and exploitation. Free, prior and informed consent, FPIC. FPIC is a cornerstone of indigenous rights under international law, including the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, UNDRIP. It means free, without coercion or manipulation. Prior, before any project or plan is finalized. Informed, with full understanding of risks and benefits. Consent, the right to say yes or no. Governments and companies must not treat FPIC as a checkbox, but as a foundation for trust and partnership. Supporting indigenous-led energy solutions. Across the world, indigenous communities are leading their own clean energy transitions. Examples include 1. Community-owned, renewable projects. Off-grid solar in remote First Nations in Canada. Wind energy cooperatives, led by Sami communities in Sweden. Micro-hydro systems in indigenous territories in the Philippines and Latin America. These projects offer clean energy while building local capacity, economic sovereignty and cultural strength. 2. Energy sovereignty movements. Indigenous peoples are asserting control over energy decisions, including choosing technologies that align with cultural and environmental values, opposing extractive or centralized energy megaprojects, advocating for investment in community resilience and infrastructure. Energy sovereignty is about more than technology, it's about self-determination and justice. The role of traditional knowledge. Traditional indigenous knowledge, TIC, complements scientific research and brings a holistic worldview to the energy transition. This knowledge includes seasonal ecological cycles and land use patterns, water and soil conservation methods, renewable energy practices, e.g., biomass passive solar design, cultural ethics of sustainability and reciprocity. Respectfully integrating TIC into policy and project planning leads to more durable, context-sensitive solutions. Enabling policies and support structures. To support indigenous leadership in the just transition, governments and institutions must recognize land and resource rights in law and practice, invest in indigenous-led institutions, training and innovation, ensure access to financing, grid infrastructure and technical assistance, include indigenous representatives in decision-making bodies and planning processes, protect land defenders and ensure legal recourse for environmental harm. Funding should be flexible and accessible, avoiding bureaucratic barriers that exclude grassroots communities. Intersectionality and gender justice. Within indigenous communities, women, youth and Two-Spirit people often lead climate and energy efforts. Their contributions must be recognized and supported, as they bring unique perspectives on intergenerational knowledge transfer, health, caregiving and food systems, spiritual and cultural dimensions of energy use. Just transition policies should be intersectional, addressing the specific needs and leadership of all indigenous identities. 7.9 Global solidarity and climate justice. Indigenous peoples are uniting across borders to defend their rights and shape global climate policy. Movements like Indigenous Climate Action (ICA), the Indigenous Environmental Network (IEN), Amazon Watch, Asia Indigenous Peoples Pact (AIPP), are pushing for a just transition that uplifts indigenous worldviews, ensures climate reparations and ends extractivism. Supporting these movements is a form of climate solidarity and justice. Conclusion. Indigenous peoples are not passive recipients of transition, they are powerful leaders, protectors, and visionaries. A just energy transition must honor their rights, amplify their voices, and follow their lead. Only then can we achieve a future that is truly just, rooted in respect for land, culture, and community. In the next part, we will explore the role of youth and intergenerational justice in driving a transformative energy transition. Part 8. Youth, Future Generations and Intergenerational Justice. The intergenerational imperative. The decisions we make today about energy, climate, and justice will shape the world inherited by future generations. Climate change is not only a scientific or economic issue, it is an intergenerational crisis. Young people are not just calling for change, they are demanding a seat at the table, recognizing that the window for meaningful action is rapidly closing. The just energy transition must be guided by the principle of intergenerational justice, the idea that today's generations have moral and legal obligations to those who come after us. The rise of youth climate movements. In recent years, youth-led climate movements have transformed the global climate discourse. Movements such as Fridays for Future, inspired by Greta Thunberg. Sunrise Movement, United States. Extinction Rebellion Youth. Zero Hour, YOUNGO, and regional youth networks in Africa, Asia, and Latin America have brought urgency, creativity, and moral clarity to climate advocacy. These movements champion climate justice, equitable policies, and an end to fossil fuel dependency. Youth are demanding not just climate action but systemic change, including green jobs and just economies, racial and social equity, climate education and participatory democracy, reparations for environmental harm and colonial legacy. Youth at the front lines. Many young people are living with the consequences of a crisis they did not cause. Heatwaves, wildfires, and floods disrupting education and livelihoods. Forced migration and climate-induced displacement. Mental health struggles tied to eco-anxiety and climate grief. In many parts of the world, young Indigenous, Black, and frontline activists face even greater risks, including violence, surveillance, and criminalization. Despite these challenges, youth are organizing, innovating, and leading with resilience and vision. Youth inclusion in decision-making. Intergenerational justice requires that youth are not just consulted, they must be active co-creators of policy and practice. This means youth representation on climate and energy councils, boards, and negotiations. Youth quotas in political parties and institutions. Participatory budgeting processes that allow young people to shape investment priorities. Legal recognition of future generations' rights, including constitutional or parliamentary ombudspersons for future generations. Young-O, the youth constituency to the UNFCCC, is one model of youth engagement in international climate policy. Green skills and youth employment. The energy transition offers a major opportunity to build inclusive economies, but only if young people are equipped with the right tools. A just transition must include access to green jobs in sectors like renewable energy, sustainable agriculture, transit, and conservation. Youth-centered skills training, apprenticeships, and digital learning platforms. Support for youth entrepreneurship in clean tech, circular economy, and social enterprise. Bridge funding and incubation spaces for young innovators and climate entrepreneurs. Green jobs should be not only decent and accessible, but also meaningful and transformative. Education for empowerment. Education is a powerful driver of just transition. Youth need not only technical skills but also critical awareness, civic agency, and ecological literacy. This requires curriculum reform to integrate climate justice, sustainability, and indigenous knowledge. Climate education campaigns led by and for young people. Experiential learning, including outdoor education, internships and service programs. Support for student organizing and green campus initiatives. Education must empower youth as changemakers and stewards, not just future workers. Legal and ethical innovations. In recent years, youth and intergenerational justice have gained traction in courts and policy arenas. Examples include Juliana versus United States, youth suing the U.S. government for violating their right to a stable climate. UN General Assembly Resolution on Climate Justice and Human Rights. Constitutional recognition of environmental rights in countries like Ecuador and Norway. These legal advances aim to hold current decision-makers accountable for the consequences of inaction. Intergenerational dialogue and solidarity. Just transition must foster dialogue between generations, not blame or division. Young people bring energy and vision, while older generations bring experience and institutional memory. Creating spaces for intergenerational learning and mutual respect, such as storytelling circles, mentoring programs and community dialogues can break down silos. Strengthen movements. Align strategies across age groups. Solidarity across generations is key to building a sustained, resilient movement for justice. Youth in the Global South. In the Global South, youth often face compounded challenges, from limited access to finance and education to authoritarian repression. Yet they are also driving bold solutions such as solar startups in Kenya and Nigeria, climate adaptation apps in India and Bangladesh, agroecology and regenerative farming in Latin America. Youth-led organizing against coal and deforestation across Asia and Africa. International cooperation must prioritize equity and capacity building for youth in the Global South, recognizing their leadership and potential. Conclusion. The future belongs to youth, but they are not waiting. They are leading the movement for a just, sustainable and inclusive world. Intergenerational justice means not only protecting the rights of future generations, but empowering young people today to help shape that future. A just energy transition must be for youth, by youth and with youth, because justice delayed is justice denied. In the next part, we will explore the cultural, spiritual, and ethical dimensions of a just energy transition. Part 9. Cultural, spiritual, and ethical dimensions of transition. Reframing the transition beyond technology. The conversation around energy transition often focuses on technology, finance, and policy. While these are critical components, they are not enough on their own. A truly just energy transition must also address the cultural, spiritual, and ethical dimensions of how we relate to energy, nature, and each other. This part explores how values, beliefs, identities, and worldviews shape the energy systems we build, and how cultural and spiritual practices can inspire more meaningful, inclusive, and sustainable pathways forward. Energy is cultural. Energy is not just about infrastructure, it is deeply embedded in our ways of living. From the cooking traditions that rely on firewood or gas, to the rituals tied to sun, wind, and water, energy intersects with cultural identity and local customs, languages and storytelling, traditional architecture and design, seasonal rhythms and daily routines. Disrupting energy systems without acknowledging cultural contexts can lead to resistance, alienation, or injustice. A just transition must be culturally sensitive and locally grounded. Spiritual relationships with nature. For many communities around the world, especially indigenous peoples, nature is not an object to be exploited, but a sacred relative or living being. Mountains, rivers, forests, and winds are often seen as spiritual entities, not just resources. Spiritual values such as reciprocity, reverence, and humility offer a different foundation for energy choices. They challenge the extractive mindset and invite us to ask, what does the earth need, not just what do we want? Can we take only what is necessary and give something back? How do we honor the sacred in our energy practices? These spiritual perspectives offer a moral compass for the transition. Ethics of responsibility and care. At the heart of the just energy transition is an ethical shift, from domination and exploitation to stewardship and care. This shift is grounded in principles such as justice, fair distribution of benefits and burdens; equity, addressing structural inequalities; solidarity, standing with marginalized communities; interdependence, recognizing our connection to all life; responsibility, owning the consequences of our choices. These values can and should guide policy, investment, and community action alike. The role of faith and religious communities. Faith-based organizations are playing an increasingly active role in the energy transition. Major religious leaders and networks, from Pope Francis's Laudato Si to Islamic declarations on climate change, Buddhist teachings on compassion and Hindu reverence for nature, are mobilizing believers to reduce carbon footprints, support environmental justice, divest from fossil fuels, engage in climate advocacy. Churches, mosques, temples, and spiritual centers can serve as hubs for renewable energy, education, and resilience. Cultural heritage and climate risk. Climate change and unsustainable energy systems threaten not only ecosystems and livelihoods, but also cultural heritage. Coastal erosion and rising seas damage sacred sites. Deforestation disrupts spiritual rituals and traditions. Heat and pollution impact cultural festivals and communal life. A just transition includes protecting cultural sites, languages, and practices, particularly those of indigenous, Afro-descendant, and traditional communities. Preserving culture is part of preserving humanity's diversity, dignity, and resilience. Artistic expression and the power of story. Artists, musicians, filmmakers, and poets are powerful allies in the transition. They help people feel, imagine, and connect with the idea of a just energy future. Through creative expression, they tell stories of resistance, resilience, and hope. Make abstract issues tangible and emotional. Bridge gaps between science, policy, and lived experience. Celebrate cultural identity and agency. Art is not decoration, it is cultural infrastructure for transformation. Healing from extractive trauma. Communities affected by decades of extraction, whether coal, oil, gas, or mining, carry deep wounds. These may include loss of land, identity, and livelihoods, health impacts and environmental degradation, intergenerational trauma, and social disintegration. Just transition must be a process of healing and renewal. This includes acknowledging historical and ongoing harms, providing space for grief and collective memory, investing in cultural revitalization and mental health, supporting spiritual and ceremonial practices for recovery. Transition is not just about the future, it's also about making peace with the past. Reimagining prosperity. Western models of development have equated prosperity with consumption, speed, and growth. The energy transition offers a chance to redefine what it means to live well, drawing from diverse worldviews that prioritize harmony with nature, community over individualism, time for reflection, family, and creativity, minimalism and sufficiency, joy, dignity, and purpose. This cultural shift is as crucial as any technological innovation. Conclusion. The energy transition is not just a technical fix, it is a cultural and ethical transformation. To be just, it must embrace the diversity of human experience and wisdom, including the spiritual, artistic, and moral dimensions that shape our lives. Only then can we create energy systems that are not only clean, but caring, meaningful, and life-affirming. In the next part, we will examine global frameworks and international cooperation that can support a just energy transition on a planetary scale. Part 10. Global Cooperation and Governance for a Just Transition. The global nature of the energy challenge. Climate change and the energy transition are fundamentally global issues. Greenhouse gas emissions know no borders, and neither do their impacts. Yet, the capacity to act is unequally distributed, with countries differing vastly in wealth, historical responsibility, technological capacity, and vulnerability. A just energy transition must be globally coordinated, but locally driven, ensuring that international cooperation supports equity, ambition, and resilience, especially in the Global South. Historical responsibility and climate debt. Industrialized countries have historically emitted the majority of greenhouse gases, benefiting from cheap energy while externalizing environmental and social costs. This has created what many refer to as a climate debt, owed to low-income nations and frontline communities. A fair global transition requires acknowledgement of historical responsibility, climate finance to support mitigation and adaptation, technology transfer without restrictive patents or conditions, support for capacity building and institutional strengthening. Justice means more than emissions cuts. It means repairing imbalances and redistributing power. Key international frameworks. Several global agreements and institutions guide energy and climate cooperation. These include 1. Paris Agreement 2015 aims to limit global warming to well below 2 degrees Celsius, preferably 1.5 degrees Celsius. Includes nationally determined contributions (NDCs) from each country. Highlights equity and common but differentiated responsibilities. 2. UN Sustainable Development Goals (SDGs). 7 Sudanese pounds, affordable and clean energy. 13 Sudanese pounds, climate action. Also linked to SDGs on poverty, health, gender, and inequality. 3. Just Energy Transition Partnerships (JETPs). Multilateral financing deals to help countries like South Africa, Indonesia, and Vietnam move away from coal. Raise concerns about inclusivity, debt, and control, but also offer opportunities for collaboration and reform. Global financial institutions and reform. Multilateral development banks, MDBs, the International Monetary Fund, IMF, and other financial bodies play a major role in shaping energy futures. However, their actions have often favored fossil fuel investments and megaprojects, imposed austerity and debt burdens that limit public investment, excluded local voices and knowledge. Reforming global finance means ending fossil fuel subsidies and investments, making climate finance accessible, affordable, and grant-based, centering justice and participation in all project funding, supporting debt relief and green fiscal space for developing countries. Climate finance and equity. At COP15 in Copenhagen 2009, developed countries pledged $100 billion per year in climate finance to support developing nations. As of the mid-2020s, this target has not been fully met, and most funds have come in the form of loans, not grants. A just transition requires doubling adaptation finance to match mitigation, prioritizing community-based and locally led projects, enhancing transparency and accountability, establishing a loss and damage fund to address irreversible climate impacts. Finance is not charity, it is justice in action. South-South and regional cooperation. Beyond North-South dynamics, countries in the Global South are building new alliances and pathways, including South-South technology sharing, regional power pools and renewable energy corridors, e.g. in Africa, climate-smart trade, transport, and agriculture collaborations. Knowledge hubs and research centers led by developing nations. These partnerships foster mutual learning, solidarity, and independence from neocolonial aid structures. Role of international civil society. Global movements and civil society organizations play a critical role in holding governments and corporations accountable. Key areas of action include monitoring and advocacy at climate summits, e.g. COP, legal action and climate litigation, transnational campaigns for divestment, clean energy, and indigenous rights, people's assemblies and climate justice forums as counterspaces to elite negotiations. The power of the people is essential to ensure that diplomacy serves democracy and justice. Technology and knowledge sharing. For the transition to be truly inclusive, knowledge must be treated as a public good. This involves open source, renewable energy technology, South-led research and development institutions, collaborative education platforms, multilingual and culturally relevant materials. Technology transfer should not reinforce dependency, it should build sovereignty and innovation capacity. Governance beyond governments. While states are key actors, governance also involves cities, companies, and communities. Global governance of the just transition must include city networks like C40 Cities and ICLEI driving local climate action, private sector accountability through ESG standards and green certifications, global labor unions advocating for decent green jobs and worker rights, community networks scaling local solutions through solidarity and exchange. Governance must be multi-scalar, participatory, and justice-centered. Conclusion. The just energy transition cannot be achieved in silos or within borders. It is a global project of transformation, requiring bold cooperation, equity, and shared purpose. From climate finance to technology sharing, from multilateral reform to grassroots diplomacy, the world must move together guided by justice, not just economics. As we close this part, we turn next to practical pathways, how to operationalize just transition at all levels, local, national, and global.